sticking to the free speech subject for a minute, I want to get your thoughts on big tech censorship and what we can actually do about that. And so, framing this discussion on the conservative side, at least, the issue we run into is, okay, can government do anything to inhibit free speech on a private entity such as Google or Facebook? And does that confronts our adherence to the First Amendment? But at the same time, we have this issue where we never foresaw, the founders, I think, could foresee a lot of things. I don't think they could foresee tech giants that have such control over what we see and hear and what we can say. And so while they technically don't infringe upon the law of the Constitution, they certainly infringe on the spirit of it. A culture of rights is just as important as the political protection of those rights, I think. And so what would be your advice from your end of this on dealing with these issues?
Well, let's put it this way. The founders certainly could not have imagined that the public square would exist in a private walled garden, and that effectively not only is it true that any idea, in order to have currency in the modern moment, has to be free to be discussed in those venues, but they also couldn't have foreseen the implications of the algorithms that adjust what the conversation looks like to those of us who are there and reading these things. So yes, we are in brand new territory with respect to the values that the founders were attempting to protect and the technical scenario in which those values have to be protected. In effect, we're going to have to navigate this in a new way. And to a first approximation, I would say we have to, as the founders did, bend over backwards to make sure that we do not exclude important ideas, controversial as they may be, from that space. And that means that abhorrent ideas have to enjoy the same protection. The founders never figured out a way to protect avant-garde speech without protecting obnoxious speech, and we're going to find ourselves in that same bind. And so we should simply accept the cost of liberty, being that people will be able to say obnoxious things. And, that's not an entirely bad thing either. Frankly, it's important to be able to figure out who believes noxious, un-American things, and allowing them to say them out loud, has the benefit of us being able to spot those things and discuss their meaning. So in some sense, we are allowing the tech giants, which have perverse incentives in many different forms, to dictate what we are allowed to discuss, and therefore what we are allowed to collectively think about, which couldn't possibly be more dangerous.
Yeah, it is. And, we're always looking for legal ways to deal with this. It would be much easier if the culture of rights that we hold so dear would come back to fruition. And then, not force the government's hand on something like this, because it's a difficult problem to move through. The other question I get asked a lot, and this is closer to your, personal history, is, okay, what do you do about the college campuses? Because constituents are constantly asking me this. What are you going to do about it? And I'm like, I don't have a great answer for them. Some states have banned campus free speech zones, not because they want to ban free speech, but because, the implication is that you can only have free speech in certain zones. And that's a mislabeling of a zone. There's things like that. There's threats of removing federal funding if you don't properly enforce due process and free speech. You're a former university professor, or no, you still are. What's your Sorry.
Well, I'm a visiting fellow at the James Madison program in Princeton, but I'm not a professor any longer.
Okay. But obviously you understand universities. How would you answer that question?
Well, I would say, look, part of the problem is that we're getting to this very late, and the issue arises because long ago, as postmodernism began to get a foothold in the universities, instead of recognizing that it was a a set of beliefs that was not worthy of being put on a par with other disciplines, we humored the postmodernists and actually gave them many different departments, which has given them disproportionate power within the structure of the university. But more importantly, it's given them access to a huge number of students who have now learned their lessons and moved on into the world. And so, in some sense, it is quite accurate that even though the movement does not espouse postmodernist things directly, that the implications of what it does espouse are clearly postmodern. So we shouldn't have let this happen, is the first answer. And that means that to the extent we are able to figure out how to fix it, we mustn't let it happen again. Certain ideas have currency because they have the ability, for example, to predict features of the real world. The sciences deserve our respect because they are capable of telling us what we do not already know. Mm-hmm. That is not the case with things like critical theory, women's studies, any of these things. And so the process of recovering the universities, if it's even possible, is going to require us to prune them back to the disciplines that are actually real. That is not going to be a quick process, though. And it is also the case that because the ideology that we now see on the march in our streets has taken over things like schools of education, it could be a generation or more before we're able to clear the bad ideas out so that we can protect the good ideas and the freedom to express new ideas and discover whether they're true.
Yeah, perhaps incentivizing STEM through our student loan program could be an option.
I am in favor, and I told the House Oversight Committee that I was in favor of the federal government using its monetary leverage to ensure that due process exists on college campuses, because that has to be there in order for those campuses to function.